In this extraordinary moment in American and world history, we have got to think outside of the box in a way that we have never done. This is an unprecedented moment, and we have got to think in an unprecedented way. And that means in terms of government action, in terms of our own behavior, how we make sure that we are not infecting other people, in terms of making sure that we are not turning our backs on the weakest and most vulnerable people in our country and in the entire world. So this is a moment that history will look back on and say, how did the people of the United States respond? Did they stand together? Did they come together? Did they panic? Did they turn on each other? And clearly our goal is to bring people together, to care for each other, to love each other, to respond with compassion, to understand that if we stand together in this very difficult moment, we will come out of it. Not without danger, not without death, not without sickness, not without economic pain, but we will come out of it if we stand together. And let me just begin by responding to the Republican plan on the coronavirus epidemic that was presented yesterday by Mitch McConnell, who is the majority leader in the U.S. Senate. And I have to say, without wanting to be tonight very partisan, to say that the Republican plan on its face is totally inadequate. The Republican proposal provides massive tax breaks and subsidies to the wealthy and very large corporations, while providing little to no assistance to the people most in need, and that is our lowest income people and working families all across this country. This is a proposal which has distorted ideas, protecting those who don't need that much protection and ignoring the pain that so many Americans are today feeling. The Republican bill gives Trump's Treasury Department enormous flexibility to bail out the airlines, to bail out cruise ships, to bail out hotels and the tourism industry, while providing no funding to help the homeless or the most vulnerable people in our country. And that is a set of priorities that is just unjust and unfair. If you are a couple making $150,000 a year, you're doing pretty well. Under the Republican proposal, you would get a $2,400 check for $2,400. But if you are a senior citizen trying to survive on $13,000 a year from Social Security, you would receive a check for $600, one check for $600. If you are a college student, if you were a college student in 2018 who just got laid off from work last week, you would receive nothing, zero, from the Republican proposal, although you may have virtually nothing in the bank. In other words, this Republican proposal is a set of ideas that should go nowhere, should be rejected by the Democrats in the Congress, and we should sit down and work out a set of policies that work for working families, not just large corporations. And right now, as a senator from Vermont, as a member of the Democratic leadership, I am attempting to do just that. So without giving you a very long speech about all of the details that are involved in a serious proposal, I want to just outline some of what, in my view, I want everybody to understand this, and I think our guests later in the show are going to talk about this. Today, in America, unemployment offices are being flooded with applications from workers who have lost their jobs. The Secretary of Treasury recently said that unemployment in America may go as high as 20%. So all across this country, we have a situation where half of our people live in paycheck to paycheck. Under good times, they are struggling economically. We have a situation where 40% of the families in America cannot afford a $400 emergency. For 40% of the families, if their car breaks down, they're going to have to figure out how they get the money to repair that car. In other words, many of our people are already living in dire economic straits. And now, for many of them, they've lost their jobs. Their paychecks are stopping. So what we have got to do is to make certain that every single American receives the financial assistance they need to survive this crisis with dignity. Let me repeat that. A basic underlining principle of what we must do in Congress right now is to make certain that every American receives the financial assistance they need to survive this crisis with dignity. Those are people who have jobs today. Those are people who are unemployed. Those are senior citizens living on Social Security. Those are the homeless. Those are people who are in jail. Those are every aspect of our society must understand that in the midst of this terrible economic and health crisis, we are one nation, and the United States government is prepared to make everybody whole. Now, no matter what the government does, no matter how good the proposals are, everybody in this country, or most of us, are going to be living under a great deal of stress. Are we going to get the coronavirus? Are we passing it on to somebody else? What does it mean that our kids can't go to school? What happens if we have a mom or a dad in a nursing home where those people are so vulnerable to this crisis? So there's enormous stress that everybody in this country is experiencing. But in the midst of all that, the least that we can do is to make sure that all of our people receive the financial support that they can get. And I would say this is not just a radical idea coming from Bernie Sanders. As some of you may have heard today, the conservative government in the United Kingdom announced that workers there would receive a check from the government equivalent to 80% of their salaries. Denmark, I believe, had a program in which workers would get 75% of their salaries. So ensuring that all working people do not suffer during the midst of this economic crisis is truly not a radical idea. It is a humane idea. It is exactly the right thing to do. Now, there has been a serious and I think productive debate in the Congress about how do you get the checks out? What is the mechanism? Because right now I worry and you worry that there are people who may not have the cash in the pocket they need to go out and buy the food to feed their families. They don't want to wait a month. They don't want to fill out 100 forms. They need those checks coming to them immediately. And in the midst of that debate, I think the growing consensus is that the fastest way to get a check sent out to people, or direct deposit, as the case may be, is through an immediate expansion of the unemployment program. And right now, as I think some of you may know, the unemployment program is a result of all kinds of cutbacks, terrible cutbacks over the years. The result is that now approximately only 25% of workers in America are eligible for unemployment. So if you're a waiter, if you're a waitress, if you're an Uber driver, if you're doing you're an independent contractor, if you're doing one of a dozen jobs, you may not be eligible for unemployment. That has got to change. So the goal here is to say that we're going to greatly expand unemployment to cover every worker in America. We're going to provide 100% of the salaries that those workers were receiving so long as this crisis exists, with a cap of $75,000 a year. We also, in addition to that, because of ancillary costs that families are going to incur, we need to provide a $2,000 monthly payment to every man, woman, and child in America until this crisis ends. Now, the Republicans are talking about one check. What in God's name does a $600 check or a $2,000 check mean one time when you are unemployed? Yes, it may get you through 3 weeks, maybe stretch it, you get you through a month. But that is nowhere near what the working people of this country need and should have. Furthermore, We need to recognize that as the only major country on earth, and this is a long-term disgrace, and long-term and ongoing disgrace, we need to make sure that every worker in America has paid family and medical leave. We are the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee that. That has got to stop. That has got to stop right now. Furthermore, I've talked a little bit about the economic impacts, which everybody is nervous about. But obviously, people are even more nervous about where we are from the coronavirus epidemic. In my view, we need an unprecedented emergency response to our current and growing healthcare crisis. In my view, we need to immediately provide the equipment that medical personnel need in order to protect themselves and do their jobs. Unbelievably. And again, this speaks to the dysfunctionality of our healthcare system and the lack of preparedness for a crisis like this. Can anyone believe that all over America, doctors do not have the masks and nurses do not have the masks or the protective gowns or the gloves that they need? And what has got to happen under the Defense Production Act, we have got to begin producing all of the equipment that our doctors need, because as I think everybody understands, that if our doctors, our nurses, our medical personnel go down, and some of them are already being infected with the virus, and they are incredibly vulnerable because they're face to face every day with people who have the virus. If our frontline defense goes down, then we are in really, really serious trouble. So we've got to do everything we can immediately, as quick as possible, make sure that we are protecting our medical personnel. Furthermore, and again, I think this is a no-brainer, but some in Congress don't agree with me, during this crisis, we need to make certain that everybody in our country who needs to go to a doctor for whatever reason gets the health care they need, regardless of their income. There is a lot of discussion right now which says, well, you know, if you have the coronavirus, the government should make sure, the insurance companies should make sure that your testing is paid for and your treatment is paid for. That's fine. But what happens right now if you are diagnosed with a serious other illness? Are you going to go bankrupt now because you've been diagnosed with cancer or heart disease, or somebody in your family has Alzheimer's? So I think right now, and there are various ways to do that, we've got to make sure that every person in America has the health care they need. And this problem is becoming more acute, because when a worker loses his or her job today, they're not only losing that income, they're losing the health care that many private employers are providing. So there are ways to do that. I think the simplest way to do it probably is to make sure that Medicare covers all of the people who are uninsured or underinsured, and make sure that nobody in this country who has private insurance pays any out-of-pocket expenses. In other words, if you have a deductible, you should not have to pay out-of-pocket. If you have a co-payment, you should not have to pay out-of-pocket. That's Medicare filling in that gap. So the fight clearly continues to do what every other major country on earth has done, and that is provide health care to all people as a right. But right now, in this emergency, we must make certain that all Americans have all the health care they need above and beyond the protections they need for the coronavirus. Furthermore, we need to make sure that we provide the testing that everybody in this country needs, and that we move forward. And I know there's a lot of work going on in the country right now, that we move forward to do it in as quick a time period as we can. There are processes out there which in a few hours can let you know whether or not you have the virus. And what's important about that is you don't want people who do not have the virus to be occupying hospital beds. We want those beds available for people who need it the most. So there are procedures out there being developed in our country and around the world to expedite the processing of the coronavirus, and we should move on that and invest in that as significantly as we possibly can. Now, above and beyond making sure that all of our people have health care, that all of our people get the testing that they need, and that those tests are processed rapidly, making sure that we have enough ICU units, that we have enough ventilators, that we have enough hospital beds. Above and beyond all of that, we are going to have to provide a massive amount of money to states and cities throughout this country. There are some states now, as I understand it, that are less than a month away from not being able to pay their employees. And if our cities and our states are unable to pay their employees, if we don't have that workforce available, it will make it almost impossible to deal with the crisis. Furthermore, in the midst of this dual crisis of coronavirus and the economic meltdown, we need to make sure that we protect the weakest and most vulnerable people in our country. And I'm thinking right now that in my own state of Vermont and all over this country, you got elderly people on very low fixed incomes who are worrying about if anyone is going to visit them, how they're going to get the nutrition that they need. So we need to be expanding in a significant way the Meals on Wheels program, the school meals program, and the SNAP program, so that nobody in America goes hungry during this crisis. I mean, that's kind of a something that is, I think, very basic. We have to make sure that everybody has the nutrition they need. In addition, we must place an immediate moratorium on evictions, foreclosures, and utility shutoffs, and suspend payments on mortgage loans for primary residences and for utility bills. And when I'm talking about utility bills, we're certainly talking about telephones, because if you don't have a telephone, you're not going to be able to communicate with anybody if you are trapped in your house. And by the way, we're talking about making sure that people can continue to have cable TV, because there's going to be a lot of information distributed via television. I don't want people's TV to be shut off as well. During this crisis, we need to make certain that no one loses their home, and that everyone has access to clean water, to electricity, to heat, and to air conditioning. In other words, the basic necessities of life must be continued regardless of the financial situation of the individual. We must also provide funding for states and localities to provide rental assistance. So it's not only preventing people from losing their homes, we will not accept millions of people facing eviction because they can't pay their rents. Furthermore, we should be covering all student loan payments for the duration of the emergency. If people don't have income coming in that's significant, they cannot be asked to pay off their student loan payments. And we must ensure that the homeless, survivors of domestic violence, and college students quarantined off campus are able to receive the shelter, the health care, and the nutrition they need as well. To the degree, on another very important issue, when my Republican colleagues are talking about bailing out the airlines, they're talking about bailing out the tourism industry or the cruise ship industry and other large entities, we must make certain, in no uncertain terms, that no bailout results in profiteering or unusual benefits going to the CEOs of these corporations and to the corporations themselves. This is a moment in which we are all in this together. This is the equivalent of a war, and we cannot allow large corporations to be profiteering. We cannot allow the drug companies to be profiteering in this moment. Any emergency credit extensions or loans to insolvent companies or industries as a result of this crisis must come with strict protections and benefits for workers, for unions, and customers, not no strings attached bailouts for executives. And that is a very important principle that we must operate under. We will put and must put conditions on this financial assistance to make sure that any corporation in America that benefits from emergency aid does not lay off their workers and pays workers a livable wage. In other words, if the government is going to provide assistance to large corporate interests, they must protect their workers. Furthermore, as work around the globe takes place right now, and we've got to invest in that as well, for a vaccine to treat people and prevent the spread of this terrible epidemic, we must make certain that the pharmaceutical industry, which has a long history of profiteering and greed and corruption, does not use this moment to profit from the pain and fear of so many people. Further, all prescription drugs that are developed with taxpayer dollars must be sold to the American people at a reasonable price. It is outrageous, unspeakable. Taxpayers put huge amounts of money into the development of drugs. The drugs are developed, and then the companies charge outrageous prices such that many people can't even afford the drugs they help to pay for development. The pharmaceutical industry during this crisis must be told in no uncertain terms that the medicines that they manufacture for this crisis will be sold at cost. No profiteering here. This economic meltdown is taking place all across the economy. As I mentioned earlier, unemployment offices all across this country are being flooded with applications. Now is the time, in this unprecedented moment in modern American history, for the United States Congress to have the courage to do the right thing in addressing the healthcare crisis that exists now, that will be getting worse. We've got to protect our medical personnel because they are the frontline defense. We've got to make sure that our hospitals and doctors' offices have the equipment that they need. We must greatly expand through the Defense Production Act all of the stuff that the medical profession needs, and I'm talking about kits for the coronavirus, making sure that those tests are processed rapidly. We have got to make sure that everybody in this country, in this emergency, does not have to worry about a medical bill. And as you've just heard from Sarah and Saru, we've got to make sure that every worker in this country is made whole in this crisis. If the United Kingdom, under a conservative government, can guarantee its workers 80% of their salary, we can do even better. What the Republicans have produced is totally useless. It is, if it wasn't such a frightening and scary moment, it would be laughable. But no one's laughing about anything anymore. You can't give workers a check for $1,000 or $2,000 and say, that's about it. Not when people are unemployed right now, have no money in the bank. They need sustained support. So we have got to make sure that every worker in this country continues to receive a paycheck, that every person in this country gets the $2,000 they need for all of the other issues that they are dealing with. We make sure that no worker in America, no person in America, loses their home or is evicted from their apartment or sees their telephone shut off. There's a lot of work to be done. Let's bring the American people together. Let's go forward together. Let's show the world that the United States of America can play a leadership role in addressing this unprecedented crisis. So let me thank all of you very, very much for being with us tonight. We'll be back shortly with some more discussion about how we can best go forward. Good night, and thank you all very much.